Hi, my name is Stephen Popp, and I'm a counseling assistant at Counseling and Psychological Services at WSU. Today, I'm going to be presenting Navigation to Normal, Readjusting to College Life After Lockdown. At first, I want to talk about everyone's different experiences across the pandemic. While everyone has certainly had extremely different experiences, there are some similarities. First, I want to talk about some of the different types of experiences that people may have had, some of the things that they may have felt across this difficult time. The lows, some of these negative emotions that some people have experienced, but probably not everyone: fear, isolation, sadness, regret, disappointment. On the other hand, some people may have actually experienced some highs during this time: calmness, hope, relief, bonding, and determination. In reality, many of us have experienced a kind of confusing mix of these things. It's important to recognize that everyone's experience has been different, but we've all had to adjust to a completely new reality, and that's something that we all hold in common. But now, as things are starting to change, things are starting to go back to normal, we're being asked to change again. And that's really what this presentation is about. What is that process going to look like as we gradually go back to something after having adjusted to something so completely different? So I am proposing 3 areas to consider that might make it a little bit easier with this transition process. 3 kind of domains, so to speak. The first being your social interactions, definitely a place that things are going to change pretty rapidly. Your everyday activities, similarly, probably going to be changing quite a bit. And also maybe more cerebral reflection, the past, the present, the future. How we look at what has happened, what is happening, and what is going to happen can be really important when we start to adjust. So starting with social interactions. Social expectations are going to be changing quite a bit. I think that goes without saying. We're going to be doing a lot of things that we haven't done in a long time. Things like being in class, meeting with large groups of people, going out to restaurants, things that we haven't even been allowed to do, even though I think everyone has probably had a variable experience throughout the pandemic of how much they've been engaging in these sorts of things. Now, the good news is, as all these social expectations are changing pretty rapidly, humans themselves are pretty adaptable. We can kind of roll with the punches, so to speak. It's one of the things that we're very good at doing. However, in some ways, this kind of works against us a little bit because we're so adaptable, we've probably adapted somewhat to all the things that have changed. We've adapted to having less social interaction. We've adapted to doing things differently, staying in our houses more, interacting like this through Zoom. It's going to be an adjustment period. We might all have expectations and hopes about going back to how things were before, but it might not be that easy. It might be a little bit more difficult than just completely resuming our previous lives. So I have a couple of suggestions, perhaps, for how we can make that a little bit easier on ourselves. Some tips, if you will. So, expectations. I think setting our expectations at a reasonable level is going to be extremely important when it comes to social adjustment. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some time in order to go back to how things were before. And at first, it's not going to be probably as smooth as we'd like. So it can be important to just set those expectations realistically, expecting a little bit of awkwardness as we make this transition to a different social interaction experience. If we hold ourselves to these really high standards and we fail to meet those high standards, then we might get kind of sad. We might get kind of upset with ourselves. But if we have more realistic expectations, it gives us a lot more room to, make mistakes, to actually adjust. Being more patient with yourself and perhaps being more patient with the people around you can be a really important thing to do when you're trying to adjust. Taking things step by step. So like I said before, if you try to jump into things just completely like they were before, you might find yourself overwhelmed pretty quickly. It might be smart to take things a little bit slower. So as opposed to completely resuming your previous life, you can choose some activities gradually, see if you can get kind of a mastery of those things that you were doing before, and then gradually build things up, maybe more towards where they were before, as opposed to just being like, everything is back to normal. Therefore, I am the same person that I was back before all of this happened. Taking a more step by step approach means that if you're running across difficulty and you're only gone up a couple of steps, that's a lot less space to fall. It kind of plays into this being patient piece as well. Gradually taking steps, more complicated, being patient with yourself and expecting that you might stumble from time to time, and that's okay as you're adjusting socially. Support. This is a big one. One of the, I guess, few positives about what has happened in the last year or so now is that it has happened to all of us. Maybe not everyone is completely ready to admit it, but it's had pretty major effects on everyone. I think a lot of us are feeling pretty tired and stressed, which means that, if you have people that you trust, family, friends, confiding in any difficulties that you might be having with those people can be a really important piece in social adjustment. Not just being patient with yourself, but allowing other people to help with that process. I think that can be really nice. This idea that we don't really have to do this all entirely on our own. I want to talk a bit about the anxiety cycle, because this is something I expect is probably going to happen to a few of us, probably a lot of us, as we're making these adjustments. So I want you to imagine that there's something going on that you're uncomfortable with. You have to present for a class, or maybe you have an assignment that's due at the end of the week, or you're invited out to a restaurant you haven't been to before, or maybe you haven't been to a restaurant in, a year. Something is making you anxious. Something that you don't want to do. You experience discomfort. You know that feeling kind of in your stomach where you're not sure. You're thinking, I'm not so certain how to feel about this. There's a couple different ways to approach this. Now, one is avoidance. So if something makes you feel anxious, then you avoid doing it. It's very, very natural to avoid. I think that's important to reinforce here. Think about it this way. If someone came up to you and they're poking you with a stick, prodding you with a stick, and you're like, that really hurts, you'd probably avoid that person. You'd get away from them. You get away from the stick because it's uncomfortable. And in some ways, avoidance actually feels really good. In the same way that you're no longer being prodded with that stick when you walk away from the person, you're no longer feeling bad. You're feeling better. It's a reinforcing cycle, avoidance, which is what can kind of make it tricky. When we avoid things that make us feel uncomfortable, that's positive reinforcement. It feels good. So we're more likely to do that in the future, which means that over time, we're avoiding more and more as we feel uncomfortable. And the more we have to experience those situations that make us feel anxious, the larger that discomfort actually grows over time, because we've avoided so much that it's gotten quite large. It's gotten quite intimidating. So this alternative approach in this anxiety cycle is exposure. So I want to say that facing anxiety is very difficult. And sometimes it can actually feel completely impossible. But the act of actually exposing yourself to the thing that's making you feel anxious, that situation that's making you uncomfortable, builds confidence. It builds your ability to tackle that situation. It builds your resilience to that situation. And like I said before, humans are very adaptable. The more you expose yourself to a situation that makes you feel discomfort, that makes you feel anxious, the more that discomfort gradually shrinks over time. So while it is difficult, it's important to kind of weigh what's happening here. We can avoid a situation. It's tempting, it's easy, but sometimes it creates kind of a cycle that's hard to get out of, where we can expose ourselves to the situation, getting through it, experiencing it, and hopefully over time getting to a point where it's no longer affecting us quite as severely as it was before that discomfort starts to diminish. I think something that might happen as we're experiencing a lot of new things that might make us anxious as we're kind of coming out of this lockdown or pandemic lifestyle, coming back to school as well. So I want you to think for a moment. I want you to consider what it is that you've done in the last year to keep yourself occupied, to keep yourself busy, to stay active, to feel enjoyment. What are the things that you have been doing? And as you think about those different things, I want you to consider, how is that going to change over the next semester? Do you think you'll be doing the same things? Do you think you'll be doing different things? What are you going to be doing that's different? You might not know, but I think it's worth reflecting on. In that topic, moving on to our everyday activities, these things will be changing a lot, probably for most of us. There's going to be many different, exciting, new, engaging, intimidating, maybe even scary opportunities, things that may have been, very innocuous before, but now might feel a little bit overwhelming. How do we strike that balance? What are some things that we can do to help us engage behaviorally, engage in the world around us? You're going to have a few tips that might be a little bit helpful, hopefully. Let's talk about your new schedule. So the first piece of this that I have here is kind of keeping track of what it is you're doing, something that we don't always think about doing, but can be really important to kind of help us regulate our activities, regulate our behaviors. Keeping a calendar, a planner. I personally keep everything on a digital calendar on my phone. And it's extremely helpful because I don't need to remember every single thing that I have to do. It relieves our memory a little bit. It reminds us what we have been doing. And sometimes when we look back across our calendar, it can remind us of things that we haven't been doing as well. You might feel really stressed out. And if you can look back at your calendar, you might be able to find out why. You look back, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, wow, I haven't had any time to myself. That can be a pretty powerful hint that maybe something needs to change in your schedule soon. To that end, let's talk about taking time for yourself. So self-care is kind of one of those big words that I don't think ever gets fully defined. And I think it's because it's so complex, right? Self-care depends on the person. It's things that you can do for yourself that are revitalizing, regenerating, treating yourself, so to speak, is a piece of self-care. And it's something, again, I think is going to be really important as we are adapting to a whole bunch of new activities, a whole bunch of new expectations in this next year, things that we may not had to deal with over the last year. But trying anyway. Sometimes we feel a little bit down. We feel a little bit depressed. We don't really feel like doing things in general. And sometimes it's important when we're feeling that way to try anyway. Think of some things that you used to do, things that you used to enjoy, but maybe you don't really feel like doing right now. And see if you can kind of do them anyway. Oftentimes our mind tricks us. It tells us that, these things don't actually sound fun, or I don't really want to go hang out with my friends because I'm just not feeling like leaving the couch today. But we actually have found through lots of research that when we go out and we engage in these revitalizing activities, these self-care activities, even when they don't feel like they're going to help, it actually tends to. Setting goals to do things, even if it feels pointless or that we really don't want to, can be a really important way to pull ourselves out of a little bit of a hole when it is happening, which oftentimes can happen when things really start to change. And changing it up. One nice thing about keeping track of what you're doing is that you can kind of tell how you're spending your time. Maybe you're finding that the way you're spending your time is not super helpful for you right now. You can ask yourself, all right, so here's how I'm spending a lot of my time. Is this helping me? Is there something else that I could do instead that might be a little bit more beneficial? For example, if you're finding that you're spending a lot of time scrolling through your phone, that might not be something that's very revitalizing for you. But if it's happening for 2 or 3 hours a day, it's probably having a pretty big effect on your mood. It might be having a pretty big effect on your schedule as well. You might be able to find another behavior, another activity that is a little bit more engaging, a little bit more revitalizing, that you could potentially kind of swap in that place. Again, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it's easy to do, it can have a very major effect on your schedule, on your personal experience as defined by your daily activities. Now I want to talk a bit about the past, the present, and the future. This has been a time of uncertainty, and it's been a time of massive change. And sometimes when we experience these sorts of experiences where everything is completely different, it makes us really reflect on the past and the future. And we kind of lose sight a little bit on the present moment. And that can sometimes cause some issues. It causes issues because there's so much past that we can reflect on, and there's infinite future that we can think about. We can kind of get lost in these two directions. But ultimately, we can't control the past and we can't control the future. So if we're spending all of our time kind of stuck in these two realms, we're neglecting the only place where we can actually make change, which is the present. Developing our skills to exist more fully in the present moment can be a really powerful way to combat kind of getting lost in the past or getting lost in the possibilities of the future. And I want to talk a little bit more about how to do this because it can be tricky sometimes. The past and the future are really enticing. But let's go ahead and give it a shot. I want you to look at this scene. Really take it in for a minute. And I want you to imagine that you're sitting on one of those rocks, looking out across this. As you're taking in the sights of this lake, this town, these mountains and greenery in front of you, I want you to imagine what it would be like to be there. What would it feel like having that grass, those plants brush up against your legs? Maybe the wind or the quiet rippling of the water. What would you smell? That freshness of nature? What would you hear? Maybe some boats going up and throughout the water. I just want you to think about that. What would your senses be telling you if this is where you were right now? It's a brief exercise in mindfulness. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's essentially just the idea that if you can tap into your senses, they can pull you to the present moment, away from the past, away from the future for a little while. And the moment doesn't have to be real. Sometimes the moment can be imagined kind of like this. Or perhaps it's a moment that you're in right now. Something defined by your senses, something that is present. So on being mindful, how do you really do it? The first way, kind of like I said, is focusing more fully on your senses. What is your sight, your touch, your sound, your smell, your taste telling you? The only way that we can interact with the present moment is through our senses. That's how we know that we're here. That's how we know what we're doing things. That's how we know we're interacting with the world around us. By tapping in more fully to our senses, we can ground ourselves, so to speak. We can plant ourselves in the present moment and access it more fully. Again, you can do this in imagined present moments as well, but even just while you're sitting wherever you are right now or standing or whatever you're doing, just pay a little closer attention to your senses. Let them kind of fill your awareness. Be aware of the feeling of the clothes pulling on your body, the hair on your head, the sounds you're hearing, maybe the whirring of a laptop or computer fan, or the heat of the phone in your hand. These things can all be very powerful tools to put us into the present moment when maybe we're finding ourselves lost in regrets from the past or what ifs from the future that are very distracting. Acknowledging emotions is also really important. Emotions don't define us, but they tell us important things. When we're sad, it tells us that it might be important to seek comfort from other people. When we're angry, it tells us that we might be wronged. When we're happy, it encourages us to continue to seek those sorts of experiences that make us feel happy. Sometimes emotions can get a little bit in the way, but they're an important part of who we all are. And being more mindful might include acknowledging our emotions a little bit more, not necessarily stuffing them down, but just bringing them up and kind of observing them in a way that is not necessarily fully like becoming that emotion, but just being aware that it's happening, respecting something about yourself as opposed to ignoring it can be a very mindful experience. And accepting uncertainty. I think this is a very large thing that we all have to work on, considering everything that's just happened. This is a very uncertain time. We don't know what's going to happen. We might be optimistic about the future, but we don't know. Of course, we never know, but times when things are so unstable, we find ourselves focusing more on those unknowns and that uncertainty. But by letting ourselves acknowledge the fact that, yeah, we can't actually control the future, that can allow us to be more mindful. It's not as easy as that, but over time, as you practice this, you can build this skill to be more okay with being uncertain and acknowledging that ultimately anything that we can do to affect the world around us can only happen in the present moment. No matter how much we think about the past, we can't change it. No matter how much we think about the future, it's not something that we can affect until it becomes the present. I think that's something to keep in mind as we're trying to be more mindful, as we're trying to live more in that present moment. That even if we don't know what's ahead, we can benefit from accepting that it's not something entirely in our control right now. The last thing I want to talk about here is just acknowledging loss. And I mean this broadly. There's a lot of different types of loss that I think that everyone has experienced loss in some form or the other over the past year or year and a half. We've all lost something. Some of us have lost loved ones to a really terrifying pandemic. Almost all of us have lost opportunities, plans, our expectations for what it was going to be like to be in college, to see people that we care about, to go out and do things. We've all lost something. And of course, depending on what we've lost, it's going to affect us in different ways, but at least we are all together and having lost something. And that is worth acknowledging, because that's a heavy loss. And I just want to say that it's okay to grieve these losses, even if you aren't someone who's lost a family member. You might feel guilty at times, being upset about losing something as trivial as a plan that you made, maybe a vacation that you wanted to have. But we don't measure our experiences against the experiences of other people. It's okay for you to feel upset. It doesn't have to be a comparison. And more generally speaking, I just want to say that it's okay for you to not feel very good right now. We all want to strive to do better, whatever that means, but this has been a historically dark time. We've all lost, like I said before, we've all gone through a lot, and we're expected again to change our entire lives, to readapt as things are going to some sort of normal, whatever that means. It's okay for you not to feel okay about that. As silly as that might sound, I want you to know that you don't have to be 100% right now. If you ever find yourself in a position where maybe you're feeling overwhelmed or a bit alone, lost, or just unsure about how to keep going, you're not alone. We are here for you. Counseling and Psychological Services, CAPS as we call ourselves. Here's our contact information. I want you to know that there are people out there who can help if you feel like you're overwhelmed. Many of us are able to get through it, but everyone's experience is different. This is not a measure of a person if they need help or not. It's okay to need help. It's okay to not feel right now. And it's also okay not to need help if that's where you're at. But I want you to know that as part of your tuition paid to WSU, you have access to counseling and psychological services. And if you feel like that's something that might benefit you, please come in. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It might just be a conversation, or maybe you know exactly what you want to work on. But I just want you to know that you're not alone in this. You don't have to do it all on your own. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I hope some information here can be helpful for you. I understand this is a very nuanced issue and there's no single silver bullet for it. But if some of it can be helpful for you, then that makes me feel happy. And I wish you all the best with the next year, with this summer. And again, if you're ever feeling like you need some help, need a little bit of extra support, just know that Counseling and Psychological Services is here for you. All right. Best of luck, everyone.